We want to protect our kids, but I feel like in the long term, one of the greatest gifts we can give them to keep them safe and healthy is that space for them to kind of connect with their own inner guidance.
Hi, friends, and welcome to the Heartful Parent Podcast. I'm your host, Rusty Keeler. In this podcast, we talk about it all, our parenting, our partnering, and our professional lives, because they are all a part of us, and we were never meant to do this alone. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Heartful Parent Podcast. I know you've heard me say this before at the beginning of an episode, but I really have a treat in store for you today. My guest today is someone who I'm very fond of. Like most of my guests, never met him in person, but we have collaborated on a number of different things over the last 3 to 4 years, and it has always been just so much fun. Some of you may recognize him because he was a participant, a speaker in the 2023 Safe Parenting Summit. And the feedback that I got from his session, his interview in the summit, was just so fantastic. So you might be wondering, well, who is this? Who is this guy? It's Rusty Keeler. And I want to tell you a little bit about him because he has a really interesting story and a really, frankly, interesting job. So from Tasmania to Texas, Rusty spent the last 30 years traveling the world and designing and advocating for children's play. And in our conversation together, he shares a little bit more about that journey. But what I love and what I think you're going to gather about him and the energy that he brings is, and this just resonated for me, he has been described as a cross between Mr. Rogers and Jerry Garcia. And that is just the perfect description for Rusty. He's a frequent keynote speaker and the author of multiple books on play, including the recent Adventures in Risky Play, What is Your Yes?, which we will share the link for that fantastic book down below. I have it. I love it. The ideas and the photos are phenomenal. Rusty is a pioneer in the movement to connect children to nature through play, and he lives with his family beside a creek in Ithaca, New York, with a backyard full of plants, straw bales, tree houses, tires, tennis balls, hula hoops, bubbles, and more. It sounds like just a veritable smorgasbord of play. Rusty is the current vice president of the USA chapter of the International Play Association. And in this conversation, we really dive into the idea of what is play, why is it important, what happens when our kids don't get enough play. And I even pose some questions at the end of this conversation about, how do we help our tweens and teens play as well and not sort of forget them in the mix? And he's got some really creative ideas and thoughts around that. And what I also love is that he brings the science and shares, like, what are we seeing? He talks about the fact that kids have lost play over the years, lost out on play. And that what the statistics and the research are showing us is that it's not okay, that the impact of that is significant and real, but that the solution is pretty simple. So without further ado, Rusty Keeler. All right, Rusty, welcome to the podcast. It is so great to have you here.
Yeah, thank you. Great to be here.
You and I were just chatting before we hit record, and you were an incredible member, speaker, participant in the 2023 Safe Parenting Summit. We've done a few other little collaborations over the years, but it's so fun to have you back and to be diving into something fun, playful, and important on today's episode.
Yeah, I'm ready to chat about all this.
Yeah, I am too. I want to start with having you sort of tell your story just a little bit. Obviously everybody listening heard me read your professional bio, but I'd love to have you just tell your story. How did this become the thing that Rusty Keeler talks about?
So I grew up in upstate New York, and I had fields behind my house, and I grew up in like the 70s and 80s. So I had lots of freedom. I was in a small town. Once I turned 10, I could get on my bike, go wherever I wanted. And, all sorts of stuff. So I had that kind of free range childhood, so that just felt normal, right? That's
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
all kids are outside riding bikes and walking around and doing stuff and having a presence in town.
Totally.
Yeah, so I kind of grew up with that. I approached kind of the childhood play stuff through design. I went to school for industrial design, and my first job out of school was, so it's like product design. My first job was designing playground equipment. I moved out west. Go find yourself. Go move out west. I lived in Washington State, and
Yay,
yay,
Washington.
that's
Yay.
right. Yeah, I was in Olympia, Seattle. I lived in Seattle, then did stuff in Olympia.
Oh, I love it. Love it. Love it.
Yeah, yeah. And so that's where I kind of learned about the importance of play in child development, in children's lives, and that adults can think about that and then design for it. Design equipment, design environments that stimulate different kinds of play. Of course, physical stuff we think of as play equipment, but also intellectual development, kids figuring stuff out, or social, making things that children have to play together, emotional, the whole thing wrapped up in a package. And I discovered that about play, and then I discovered that I loved designing for play. Thinking about that, I kind of like, oh, this works with, the way I think and how I design. Then I got a chance to work in the Netherlands at a sister company over there. And my ideas totally changed from being equipment-based design to more holistic environments, more natural play spaces. I saw, one-of-a-kind playgrounds and parks and interactive sculpture that you could move. I saw more one-of-a-kind playgrounds, not just kind of out of catalogs, sculptural things, just kind of this whole world. The children, lots of freedom. And then also started nature and nature in children's environments. So it wasn't just equipment based, but there were hills and there were berry bushes and plants and trees and stuff like that. So that I was kind of having those, I was being submerged in that environment. At the same time, I was thinking about my own childhood, where I grew up, those fields behind my house, playing in the seasons, having that kind of freedom. And so then my idea shifted from play equipment. I still like designing it, but I want to create more. Kind of more experiences, more environment, connection to nature, connection to landscape, to the earth, to seasons, and the community, local community, build it with the local community. So I came back and that kind of began my career in design. I kind of re-began it on my own, but doing these natural play spaces. So instead of being equipment based, they're more landscape. You have hills, boulders, sand, water, mud, planting sunflowers and stuff like that. So and then that was kind of the bulk of my design work for years and years. But as I traveled around, I love looking at interesting spaces. I've done a couple of books about this, and I've done talks and kind of gone all over the place and done study tours of playgrounds and adventure playgrounds, landscape playgrounds, kind of the forest schools, the whole thing. I started liking, my aesthetics changed. I started liking more like rough and tumble spaces or things that weren't just built by the designers or the builders, but like they were loose parts, or kids could build their own things. And so that's like these adventure playgrounds in Europe where, it started after World War II, lots of loose parts, and kids, just have this freedom to like build their own playgrounds and tree houses and, have animals and all this kind of stuff. And so I really liked that idea, for the idea of children's freedom. And yeah, it's a little risky and it's a little messy, but I was like, wait, that's like the good stuff where kids can, really use their creativity, their, problem solving, critical thinking skills, and, collaborations and stuff. So through my work with natural play spaces, I started liking more of these kind of open-ended, loose parts, adventure playground type things. Did some work in that realm. And then it's kind of branching off of that, started to think about, well, where do children play? And knowing that children need that kind of stuff. They need, they need other kids. They need to be around other kids and kind of freedom and chance to, have effect of their own environment. So then I started being interested in like just the child-friendly city and in general. And how do we design the spaces where children live? How do they move through the city? How can we help them have freedom? And I'm learning about children, but adults, fears and, not wanting kids to get hurt and, basically now have a concern of the predicament of children being overscheduled indoors, too much work, feeling depressed, anxious, and, and screens and all that stuff. So yeah, feeling like we can weave the positive things together to kind of looking at the state of childhood now. It's different than my 1970s, 80s upstate New York cornfields. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So there's so much in there that you just said that I want to dive into, but I want to say I also grew up in the 70s and 80s, and we had a horse pasture down we lived on a dead end street, and there was like this big horse farm kind of down at the end. And my parents did not think twice about letting me sneak under the barbed wire that said no trespassing and letting me go play, because I knew my way around horses, and I would go play with these horses, and I would go take a rope and lead them around. I'm sure in fact, I did get caught once, and the owners were not so pleased. But, there were trees and there were things to climb, and it was just great fun. And that was like, nobody even gave that a second thought from a parenting perspective. And it's so, so different now. And I fast forward and I think about when my older daughter, who's now a teenager, was in elementary school, and I was involved with the PTA. And then one of the things that we were tasked with doing, and me and another gal were the chairs of this committee, to replace the playground, right? Because it was old and falling apart, and it had been wooden, and it was not well cared for, splinters galore, right? It wasn't a great situation. But we were so limited in what we were allowed legally from the district. And hearing you describe sort of play equipment, like we were given a catalog. And even within that catalog, there were limitations of what we could do that weren't just financially based, right? And we were told, like, here, create this playground. And I think we did as well as we could, but I look at it now and I'm like, there are no natural spaces really for these kids to play. So everything that you were just describing really kind of resonated with me. But with that as the background, start with just a more basic question. Because some parents may be, asking well, how do we keep kids safe? Or what's the big deal about all this? Or, what's wrong with overscheduling? Like, it makes my life easier. True, got that. But what is play? And why is it even important to kids? And, based in your experience, why is play with loose parts or in natural spaces different, and I'm hearing better, than play on, colorful molded plastic?
Yeah. Well, there's so many layers to why it's important, play is important, and the reasons that children are not getting that kind of freedom that we remember from our fields behind our house or in our towns, or just kind of the way that childhood, that was normal childhood. There's something about children having their own autonomy. Say when we were free ranging and we were out making decisions about going under the fence or climbing a tree, or, making up the rules of our own game, if we're playing stickball or, whatever it is, or making our own forts, whatever. Children are kind of making up their thing, and they are, problem solving, and they are, decision making, and there's often hierarchy. I've heard people talk about how children are kind of pack animals. All the different ages, they were all together, all different ages were together, and young ones would learn from old ones, and, older ones could be nurturing and, leaders, or they could play like the little kids too. So there's, the idea of having all these mixed ages together. But in today's society and education, there's a lot more segregation according to age groups and developmental levels and things. So I guess just the idea of free play, it's a chance for children to kind of make their own path. If we can think about it at a school, what is recess like? Are there lots of rules? Is it just, fixed playground equipment, or is there more freedom? Can you do different kinds of things? Can you have a snowball fight? Are you allowed to, or is that too risky? Or, what are the decision-making things with these schools? So, I feel like as I went in through design, trying to create environments that support play and children being and having their own, opportunity to make discoveries and change the space themselves with loose materials, realizing that children aren't getting that. It's for me, it's still a little mind-boggling because of the way that I grew up as a normal thing. But I have the concerns that children aren't getting that. And, we hear a lot with screens having an effect on mental health. But it's also the idea of not having the kind of freedoms to just play, to just be. That was kind of rambling, and I don't know. There's still so much different angles to get to, but I believe that children are full of potential in their lives, and that we want to keep them safe and protected, and it makes sense that we want to protect them. But often for them to be successful in life, they need to stretch out themselves and learn how to kind of manage in the world. And if you're building a tree house or you're climbing a tree and your life is in your hands or whatever, there's a lot of decision making and feelings that go along with it. But if we're just protecting, we don't give them the opportunity to have those kind of experiences. They'll still make their way, but they might not be as confident. They might have more anxiety in life. And for me, play, the idea of creating time, space, and materials for play is one of the big answers to it.
Okay, you're right. There's so many layers to everything that you just shared that I kind of want to unpack some of it. But there are a few words or phrases that really jumped out at me as you were talking. And I love the way that you said, like, you started your answer by saying play is just letting children be. And on the surface, that's like, what? But then when you think about it, we don't let kids just be very often in this day and age. But the other words that sort of jumped out at me, like if we take that as our starting point, like what does it mean to just let a child be? And not like let them be, like ignore them, but let them be this creative, explorative, curious, wondering creature, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then what I heard you actually do, and I want you to tell me if I'm like making the right connection. I think that I am, given our previous conversations and in all of this, but that play, that letting them be, also builds these skills that you were mentioning, like decision making, problem solving, learning to be autonomous in those things, and that those are an antidote for so much of what ails our kids, which is, anxiety, depression, etc., that we can attribute at least in part to screens. But I think we also have to own our own piece in that, right? Which is, we're not, even before screens were as prominent as they were, we started to draw back on children's ability to play.
Mm-hmm.
Can you dig into that piece a little bit? What are the skills that these kids who are in, these free play spaces getting, or what are the skills that maybe we got, you and I, as kids, that so many kids aren't getting now?
Yeah. Well, I believe that play is like the natural way that we grow and develop as humans. Other species also play. Raccoons and coyotes and, your dog and, everything. And I feel, especially for humans, that is kind of how we learn and grow, and make sense of the world, and then learn how to be in the world, cause and effect. There are certain things, that you're learning, like children are learning to pour water. Oh, that's how water works. Or they're having oh, wait, that was my water cup. And someone just took it from you, and then there's negotiating the world and how that works. There's literally brain and muscle development. I'm going to get my own water, and it's lifting a really heavy thing, and so I'm going to get some muscles upper body, but then I need so much help. I need someone to help me. So then there's collaboration, hey, or communication. Will you help me do stuff? This is kind of the early childhood route. And so I feel like everything kind of happens through that kind of play and being. Even before academics, we can get to academics, But I feel like in many ways we need to kind of protect from academics the idea of just child development, child like
Yeah.
developing and growing and finding out who they are and how they feel. And I feel like a role as adults can be like almost more social support of like, oh, your feelings, or here's how you express feelings, or here's how you, while children are navigating and having free spaces, in free spaces, or having that kind of freedom. If you're talking about older kids like what we had, or at these adventure playgrounds with loose parts, we're making decisions about weather. Like, I'm going to go outside, so what should I wear? You know,
Uh-huh.
Cause and effect. Kids were probably pretty well dressed. We knew what to wear, or our mothers might have yelled, grab the sweater. Uh, but then also, like, what do you need, or how do you navigate space, or how do you keep yourself safe? There's a innate desire for children to like be a little risky, test the limits, and that's a natural progression in life. Like you're pushing the limits, you're taking it to the next level. You want to try things or balance things, and not everybody, there's a spectrum of how much, what's your relation to risk. But infants gonna crawl and crawlers walk, walkers gonna run, climb, and all this stuff. And then whatever, then you're sneaking under fences and you're taking the neighbor's horse for a waltz.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. So all that, so that's important to have that kind of stuff, and learning, about the world. So if you don't have that, because I feel like that's almost like, oh, that's freedom, and you're growing and you're learning, and you might learn from your mistakes, or if you're building a fort with scrap lumber sticks, you think about how you're going to build it, or maybe something lands on your foot, and you're kind of, it's just all learning. Like it's all learning, and it's like a natural learning that it's not necessarily like top down, like adults
Right.
teaching and not the. But if children don't have that, what happens? Like, if that's like a natural, just be curiosity in life and wonder, and kind of getting grounded in themselves in the world. But if they don't have that, and it's just adults, or it's just yeah, whether it's schools or parents, or violin teacher, all this stuff's great. We're all trying to nurture, do great for our kids and protect, both keep them safe, but nurture them and provide great experiences so they can be the best selves they can be, that we be these people that we love.
Yeah.
So it's weird to think like, oh well, another great thing to give them besides these opportunities is like space, free space to just be. We're competing with screens,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, and how do we do that? So I have lots of ideas too about how neighborhoods can do that, cities, and people doing great stuff out there. But I feel like that needs to be in the mix, because it's kind of fun to be with your friends and doing things, but also it's needed. Like, there's something inherent about becoming an adult, being human, that needs, I'm about the real experiences, real, tangible, out in the
Yeah.
world, things.
As you were talking, something like jumped out at me because you said we're competing with screens, which I think you're totally right. I also wonder, and sort of my own thoughts around this are that we're competing with each other because there's become this sort of hyper competitive parenting environment, right? Where our egos are all wrapped up in our kids. And so that's why we want to give them all these experiences. But also, we are kind of being told culturally that you're only a good parent if you are engaged with your children at all times, right? And that's exhausting. And that's why we then put them in all these activities, because we can't engage with, right? Nobody, I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
love my children. I love my children. I don't want to be with them all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Newsflash. Like, I don't. They can play on their own. But there's this, I sometimes think there's this competitiveness with adults that has also gotten in the way of letting kids have that space that you were just talking about. we have this idea that you have to be super involved, super engaged, present, and yes, being present, engaged, and involved with our kids is great. Like, I advocate that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be every minute of every day.
Yes. Some ways it feels like absurd to think we're going to have to brainstorm how children can be outside and meet with their friends and do things. If we think about our childhood, like, well, that was just normal, like, and you didn't want to stay inside, or your parents kicked you out, go. Yeah, that idea, like, I wasn't really grounded, but I heard other people got grounded, and that was like the worst thing. You had to stay inside. You couldn't be out with your friends or where the action was and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so it seems weird that we would have to build that in, but we sort of do, or encourage parents, or like, be in solidarity with other parents or neighborhoods, or like the after school or the play clubs, or doing street, there's lots of different interventions, basically. So it feels weird that we have to do interventions, and yet, okay. If that's where we are, we can intervene to try to support this kind of play. And because it's also community building, it's like friend building, and it's like, connections to the outside and children having this stuff. I guess with all these things, with the screens and, kind of overprotectiveness or mental health kind of issues, the good news is that we can make change. We can step in. We can, connect with our communities to try to, reverse it. Yeah.
I want to dig into that a little bit as you're talking about this. I have two girls. People who have listened to the podcast for any length of time know this. I've got a teenager who's 15, and I've got a younger daughter who is almost 8. And I'm an older mom, right? Like, I had her in my 40s, and my husband and I joke that she's a little bit feral because we just were too tired by the time, she came along. And, both of my girls are wonderful. Of course, every parent, thinks that, but like in their own way. But as I look at my younger one, she is, frankly, I think in many ways more independent and more ready to go sort of solve her own problems. One, because by the time I had her, I'd, stumbled upon work like the work that you're doing, but also because I just didn't have the energy to be with her all the time. So she's outside playing with kids of all different ages. The most exciting gift that we've given her in the last year was a large cardboard box that, that my husband carved a door in so that they could like play in this box.
Absolutely. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
I mean, they would fit 3 kids in this box. I'm like, I don't know how y'all are getting in there, but have at it.
Yeah.
But, there's some, I call it feral because in the case of my child, she is a little bit feral and I kind of love it. But it's so hard to make the decision to do that. So you had talked about there are a bunch of strategies or interventions, I guess is the word that you use, that you would recommend or that you think could help us address this. Let's talk on that neighborhood level, because, many parents may be like, look, I don't have time for activism at the school level or, in the bigger space, but maybe in my neighborhood, there's something I can handle.
That's right.
What would you love to see parents do or promote in the micro community sense, if that question makes sense?
Yeah, totally. Right. Where your sphere of influence, how can you make change? And so I can tell you some stuff that we did in Ithaca here in our neighborhood. One was like play in parks. So there's like a neighborhood park. And, I'm interested in these adventure playgrounds where kids are building all their own stuff and everything. And there is a profession, the people who work at these are called play workers. They're trained, they have degrees, they understand play and how to intervene in the least, intrusive way, but when they do, it's to support the play. So it was this idea of like, well, what if we put some play workers in parks on certain days of the week? They have this in Europe where there's like playmobiles. The play van shows up at this park on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then everybody in the neighborhood knows. And so kids come out for it, and then parents know, oh, well, there's adults. Okay, there's some responsible adults keeping an eye on things there, so they'll feel more comfortable letting their kids go. It's all this like incremental, like, do I let my kid go out? Everyone's neighborhood is different and safety and everything. And so, but I feel like there's these little steps of, okay, well, how can we as parents feel more comfortable? Oh, okay, there's play workers. And even if you don't have a trained play worker, you could start with, maybe there's you go through and different parents are there each day or something. And trying to have hands off as much as possible. We've also done like play streets where we block off the street. In our town, you can go to the city and there's permits for like block parties and things where you can get the barricade, you make a permit, you get the barricade. And we did this one summer where we did it like every Sunday for 2 months. And then everybody knew, and it was right next to a park and a creek, so it was a nice location, but that was like an extra safe place to play because there wasn't traffic right there.
Right.
And so everyone kind of came out of the woodwork, came out, and we had food and grills, and people brought volleyball nets, and kids could bike in the street and chalk and all that kind of stuff. And so it was like, oh, there's, we're coming out, and then we're seeing each other, and then, the same age kids, and then there can be like connections after those things, after these meetups.
Yeah. Love it.
So in some ways it's just like, communicating or making your own front yard, more fun, or the sidewalk that, what do you put? Do you hopscotchy kinds of things in your sidewalk, or, do you just spend more time in your front yard?
Yeah.
To meet
or give them a
people
cardboard box.
Well, it is as simple as that. Yeah. Go to a park with 5 cardboard boxes. Tell everybody you'll be there.
Totally.
Step back. Yeah.
I mean, it really was remarkable to watch what they were doing with this box. And then my daughter also started she is a little leader in the making, which, I love sort of watching happen, but she wanted to start a tree climbing club. Now, the problem being that most of the trees are not, we have evergreen trees in the Seattle area. They're a little trickier to climb than a lot of the, sort of more deciduous trees on the East Coast.
Yes.
So finding trees that worked for this tree climbing club was a little trickier, but she was all into it, and kids kind of got on board. They were like, great, let's go find some trees to climb. And then, we had to say, well, you can't do that in like everybody's front yard because not everybody wants you climbing their trees, but the ideas were flowing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which was fun, was really fun to watch. We talked about this a little bit. We touched on this, but as you have watched, your own kids and kids in your community and around the world, because I know you do work all over, step more into play, or I almost hesitate to say it's the kids stepping into the play because they're ready and willing and ready to go. It's the parents that have to sort of allow that. What are the long-term impacts that you have seen, both just from a anecdotal sort of practical standpoint, but also in the scientific sort of more academic literature in terms of the long-term mental health and physical health impacts of letting our kids play?
Yeah. Well, so I'm in Ithaca, and there's 2 universities here, Ithaca College and Cornell University. And I have friends that are professors, lecturers, and I know people at other colleges. And you hear them talk about like this wave of children who have not had that kind of freedom, where college is like the first time they're on their own, and maybe they're not on their own. Parents are still very involved and, texting teachers and, taking care of problems and helping children, which is, we want to help our kids, but they're seeing like children are less resilient, I guess. When you look at the timeline, and this is before the screen, the screen scare of even before that, there was like trending to children not, having more anxiety, worrying too much, or not being able to bounce back from setbacks, grades and things. And so, there's a lot of talk about it being that children didn't have time on their own to solve their own problems, or to, know that they could fail and get back up again, whether it's, and I feel like it's, you're bouncing on a log, you're climbing a tree, you fall, you can get back up, or then you make different decisions. And that skill translates to if you fail a test, or, you don't get the part in the play, or, these kinds of things, what kind of foundation you have of how do you have that built growing up, that kind of resiliency. So I know that there's a lot of talk of that at college level. And I would say some of the more successful kids, a lot of my friends, their kids are like now in college or starting to, I have younger kids, so I'm still in the thick of it. But the children that have, had more free range feral childhoods, who lived on the edge of town or who that were always doing stuff in the, roaming and ranging around, that they do have, more resiliency, but also this kind of critical thinking. Like they are the ones, if they have the time to be out there, okay, making their decisions, thinking critically. Is this a street to walk down or not? Or, what do I feel comfortable? Or if this branch, if I'm climbing a tree, they're making those decisions. We want to protect our kids, but I feel like in the long term, one of the greatest gifts we can give them to keep them safe and healthy is that space for them to kind of connect with their own inner guidance, their own inner knowing, their own inner decision making about these things. We all have that inside, but if it's just the parent making, protecting, saying no, don't do that, or don't climb that, or, whatever, I'll talk to your teacher for you, or all this kind of stuff, we do it with best intentions, but we're kind of robbing the children or taking that opportunity away for them to do it themselves.
Yeah.
So I feel like this kind of play, when they're building their own things or with other kids in social situations, and the pack of kids, they're learning that kind of stuff there.
As you've been describing all of this, the question that sort of keeps rising to the top for me, we're talking about younger kids, I imagine, right? Like that are in elementary school. They don't have a lot of homework. Hopefully they're able to, kind of get out and play after the school day is over. But then our kids hit middle school and high school, and as the parent of a high schooler, it often feels like whatever play was there is gone, or it's very different at best. And there's all these other things that come into their worlds that start to kind of take over. Obviously, my 15-year-old is not going to be entertained if I give her a cardboard box out in the yard.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm curious if you've thought at all or talked with people at all about, like, how do we help extend play or adapt play in these spaces for older kids, tweens and teens, so that they're still getting all those benefits that you talked about, the collaboration, cooperation, problem solving, physical strength, autonomy. I mean, you really, the words came out all over, when I asked you that question. What can we do for those older kids? And if we didn't do it when they were younger, is it too late?
Never too late.
I love that answer. I'm so glad you said that. So what do we do?
Yeah. Well, one of the things they say that, if we want children to be outside and in the real world, one of the things that attracts them most are other children, are other kids. Oh, there's other kids out there. There's other kids doing things. And so it just takes like the first kind of people starting that, like, well, get outside. And it could be like walking the dog in neighborhoods and, stuff like that we think about. But I think it's that idea of starting to create those kind of spaces. I mean, some is bigger than just us as parents. Some is like the city thinking about, like, okay, we design for early childhood, we design for playground for elementary, but what happens when those elementary kids get older? We just forget about them, or we'd rather not see them, or, that used to be, and now it's just, we're another step further. But I think on the successful, when I've traveled around, the places I feel are successful are places that build for all ages. I did a talk in Estonia, and I saw one of the most amazing skate parks. Like, they have cross-country ski hills, but they also have just like fun landscapes to hang out in. So it's like, and in my own town, there's a great skate park. And in the summertime, I love hearing the sound of skateboards in the street. Like, because the kids are like autonomous and they're going to get to the skate park, that's on the other side of the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Not everybody likes to skateboard, but that idea of, like, can we build places that, teens can hang out in a positive way, and that gives them interesting things to do. And it could be parkourish, stuff or just places to, like, hang out, in neighborhoods, or places to go where they can convene and see what happens. So that's kind of my designer and planning
I was going to
mind,
say,
I
like, it
guess.
feels like this is coming back to the, full circle back to the design piece. And we really have to be encouraging our elected officials and decision makers to be thinking about everybody in the community as they design these spaces. Rusty, as we wrap up our conversation today, the question I want to sort of end our time with is, like, what is your dream? If you could sort of send all the parents listening to this off with a vision for what the world could be through your unique lens, what is that? What would you love to see for all of our children?
Yeah. Love that question. Yeah. I believe and I would love to see that all children have the opportunity to play, to be outside, have safe environments. My dream is that they're all loved and supported and safe, the basics, well fed and housed. And then after that, that they have freedom or they have chance for friends, that they're not overscheduled so much and there's less homework, bearing down on them, and that schools feel less pressure with Common Core and high stakes testing, so that they can let off a little bit on children, and the pressure, in that world. I'd love to see, more of these adventure playgrounds or more opportunity for children to get outside where they're changing their environment. There's loose parts that they can build, they can have power over their environment. Yeah, I'd love to see cities designed with children in mind of how they're going to move through space, safely, watching out for cars and, having bike lanes, having good sidewalks, walking kinds of things. Yeah, I think that idea of children being able to find ways to be with their friends, so it's not all just social media, so that it's like in real life, real opportunities. So some of that is the scheduling or after school clubs or places to go so that you can still just be with your friends. It doesn't even matter what the screens are, are they saying you're having real relationships. I love the idea of nature. I would love that all children have access, to some form of natural environment and, farms and apple trees, apple orchards and chickens, or that connection to a, stream or woods or, within walking distance. Some of that's designed too, of like new environments and new developments. And, that's a part of, we think about where do the children play? Like, let's build that into our development, that there is some, vacant land. But then even thinking about like schools, okay, I got a million dreams.
I know. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm loving this. I'm loving it.
I think about how many schools are out there in our country where, okay, there's the school, there's blacktop, there's play equipment, and there's sports fields. But then maybe there is like a vacant, scrubby woods in the corner that you're not allowed to go in, but it's there. And it's like always been there. And kids would love to get in there and play. And maybe that is the start. Like, where are the spaces that we already have that we can inhabit, that we can clean up, that we can, make it so that we feel comfortable letting children be in there. And that's either with ourselves as parents, hanging out in there, letting kids play, or during recess, the teachers, or just asking for permission. We've done that in Ithaca where we've taken over some of those woods, and like, that's all the good stuff. There's trees and branches and leaves and, vines growing up and all sorts of stuff. So I think my dream also is that we start working together and realizing, wait, we do need to do something. Like with the high depression, high anxiety, children's suicide rate, all this stuff. It's like, if everything was great and we're overprotecting, overscheduling and overschooling, if everything was great, I'd say, okay, we're doing great, but the numbers are not showing that. So It's like, all right, we really do need to do something.
Yeah.
It's serious, but the good thing is it's fun. Like, the solutions are like a little bit more fun for kids and less, less anxiety, less stress of like pressure and, time and everything. There's like that idea of more freedom. It's going to take work and communication and conversations, but okay, let's do it. Let's have the conversations. Let's problem solve.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we can, have a slice of maybe the kind of experiences that we had as children growing up.
Yeah.
In for the sake of freedom and autonomy and learning who we are. It doesn't have to look like what we had, but it could be in any kind of space.
Right. I just love, and I think is that like the way you said that there is so perfect to end on this idea. The numbers are not showing it's okay, right? If it were, great, then keep on doing what you're doing. But the numbers are not reflective of that. So something does have to change. Something has to be done. But the solution in this case is fun and actually not that hard. Such a great sort of hopeful note to end on that, we as parents and adults in the lives of many children can start to affect that change pretty quickly and simply and inexpensively and, at least on the closer to home scale. Rusty, we could talk for ages. We've talked before. I love every time we get to connect. I know that people listening to this are going to want to hear more from you, to get on your newsletter. You send out a fabulous newsletter every week. And I know you've got a free download available for parents. Anything you want to add about that or how people can connect with you?
Sure. Yeah. I love talking about all this stuff. So I look forward to talking to you about all this more, but I'm also happy to, people email me or have questions or want to brainstorm for their own community. I like talking about it with everybody. So people can feel free to reach out to me through my website. Yeah. The newsletter. I have a fun free outdoor loose parts guide. And, people can download that and just kind of talk about like, yeah, okay, well, what could you put in your own backyard? What could you do from natural
Love
things to boards to the cardboard box. Yeah. So
To
I'll
the
say,
cardboard
so,
box,
yeah,
that's
so
right.
people could start now, do the cardboard box like you're describing and see what happens.
Yeah. You don't have to start with a horse at the end of the road, right? Rusty, we will put all of the links for how people can find you and the link for that free download with the outdoor loose parts guide in the show notes. So folks can just click below to grab that. And I hope they will connect with you because I love getting your newsletter and you have a fabulous book that I have upstairs. I realized I didn't bring it down with me, but the photographs and the, everything in that book is just phenomenal to spark ideas. So we'll make sure there's a link for that as well. Yeah. Rusty, thank you for being on the podcast. It's been so great to see you again.
Thank you. You too.
Yeah. And for those who are listening, heads up, Rusty is starting his own podcast here in 2025. Ooh. And in fact, by the time this interview airs, it's probably well underway. So,
that's right. Oh, it's going great.
Yeah, that's right.
Great conversations.
Phenomenal.
Oh,
people should tune into your podcast as well, because that's another great way to connect with you. Great. So we'll make sure that link is down below. And Rusty, let's have a great spring and summer outside.
Sounds good. Yeah. Thanks, Rusty. Bye.
All right, y'all. I hope that you enjoyed that podcast episode. I hope that you learned as much from Rusty as I have over the years of getting to know him and working with him and being on his mailing list. We're including all of the links for where you can get in touch with Rusty down below. And I highly recommend, tracking him down and connecting with him because he just has such a unique take on all of this and a really fabulous energy that he brings to it. As I said in the introduction to this episode, he's been described as a cross between Mr. Rogers and Jerry Garcia. And that just, I think, sums it up right there. And he's really, really awesome. One of the collaborations that Rusty and I did is that he, a while back, popped into the Heartful Parent Academy and did a master class in there for the members. And I was so grateful to him for his willingness to do that. And so you've heard me mention the Academy before and my one-on-one coaching before. And I'll just add that, this podcast, which I love being able to bring to you, is an expensive labor of love. And it is my private coaching clients and my Academy members who really make this podcast possible and gives you so many more opportunities to feel heartful about your parenting. Because I do bring you really cool things in there, like exclusive interviews with folks like Rusty. So I would love to see you join me in coaching or in the Academy or in both. if that feels like the right fit, we are going to include those links down below for you as well. All right, without further ado, I'm going to sign off, say cheers, and I'll see you next time for another great episode of the Heartful Parent Podcast.